Well, thanks for that, Chris. Yes, about the parental advisory warning there, we put that on the advice of the rather risk-averse university lawyers, but really this presentation isn't nearly so as exciting as you might think, so don't please criticize me in the break for not delivering on this scintillating promise here. Look, as a Japan studies professional, as Chris said, I'm very aware of cultural differences between Japan and between Australia. Stuff which is considered controversial in Japan wouldn't really be seen as a problem here, and stuff which is seen as very problematic here often isn't seen as problematic in Japan. And this is particularly true when it comes to representations of children. Actual children, when it comes to thinking about actual bodies of children in sense of unclothed children, nude children. In Japan, where communal bathing is still fairly common, nudity doesn't really have a very sexual context, and certainly, naked kids running around wouldn't necessarily be considered terribly problematic. And in thinking about this, you might think back to the last weekend. There was a news item, did you see it, about a grandfather who had let his granddaughter take her dress off and run around naked in the waves. Somebody called the cops and they got interrogated over that. And I think that just shows how anxious we are as a community about children, who might look at our children, or the way that they might look at our children. But where the difference really hits home to me professionally in terms of my work is the way in which Japanese popular culture doesn't segregate what you might call adult themes from a youth audience in the way that we do in Australia. So Japanese manga, that's kind of comic books, or anime, which is the kind of animations which are very popular with young people, can often feature adult themes, which in a kind of Disney context, Disney just wouldn't go there. And when these things are legitimately introduced into Australia and classified, they're often modified in such a way to remove those themes. But one of my problems as a teacher of Japanese popular culture is that when students find out that what they're viewing is a kind of doctored version of the real thing that they can get in Japan, what do? They immediately go on the internet and try to find the real thing. And that can bring them into problems with legislation in Australia. So my big question here is really looking at the way in which child abuse publications legislation in Australia has gradually, it's every 2 or 3 years, it's expanded and it covers more and more material. And what particularly concerns me as a Japan Studies professional is the fact that purely fictional characters, that would be cartoon characters, or animation characters that you might see in Japanese popular culture, which place characters who might appear to be under the age of 18 in violent or sexual scenarios can actually be considered to be child pornography or child abuse publications under Australian law. And we know that cartoon representations of children in sexual contexts are definitely covered by the law, because we actually have a case, a ruling in 2008 by Justice Adams. Some guy had been caught with these manipulated JPEG cartoon Simpsons characters, including Bart and Lisa, who were placed in a sexual scenario. And according to Justice Adams' judgment, the legislation definitely intended to capture these kinds of representations. Well, if I can just do a bit of audience research here. If you actually remember this hitting the news in 2008, it was known as the Simpsons cartoon porn incident, and you actually saw any of those headlines, could you actually put your hands up? Because I'd be very interested to know. Well, isn't that remarkable? Out of perhaps 100 people, probably just 4 or 5. So one of the anxieties I have about this legislation is people simply don't know. They don't know that it's illegal. So when, particularly students of mine, despite me telling them about these problems, it doesn't actually deter them from looking out and downloading this kind of material. And I think that's something as a society we need to be concerned about. People simply don't know how broad the legislation is. And I think that's very problematic if we're going to be prosecuting them for having this stuff on their mobile phones or on their internet. So what I want to do is give you some information about the kinds of communities that you might find out there online which actually do deal in representations of sexualized images of young people, and to think about them outside of a context of pedophilia or child abuse. And I want to start by talking about looking at that. You have to probably be over 40 to recognize. You recognize these characters here? Yeah, it's Kirk and Spock. Okay, going back to the 1970s, it's very well researched. There's a genre of popular fan fiction known as slash fiction, mainly developed by women fans in the States, but now a kind of global enterprise, whereby any kind of strong relationships between male leads in mainstream TV programs, these fans began to imagine same-sex relationships taking place between them. And the prototype here was Kirk Spock. It's Kirk slash Spock, hence slash fiction. Another huge one at the time in the 70s was Starsky and Hutch. I don't know if that ever made it to Australia. But anyway, slash fiction is a very well-established genre of women's fan fiction, which imagines blokes getting it on. And if you don't believe me, you can actually Google for this very well-known article by Shoshana Green, which is called "Normal Female Interest in Men Bonking." Honestly, it's a very well-known article analysing this genre from a psychoanalytic point of view. And as Shoshana Green kind of says, well, we're not at all surprised when blokes get a bit excited about fantasizing about, girl on girl, nurses and all that kind of stuff. We're not remotely surprised that men might find that exciting. So why are we surprised that women do it too? Why are we surprised that, some women in their fantasy lives might imagine this kind of bloke-on-bloke action? And Shoshana Green is saying, well, it's perfectly normal. Women do it too, just relax about it. Now, where we can't relax about it in Australia is when this slash fiction genre actually begins to spread out to pop culture products which involve characters who are or might appear to be under the age of 18. And I can tell you at the moment, one of the most popular slash fiction fandoms internationally, it happens in every language, in every country, is Harry Potter slash, right? And these girl fans, girls in their early teens working up, perhaps to uni students in their early 20s, are reimagining these relationships to introduce romantic and sexualized scenarios, which perhaps are kind of implicit in the text, but are never really explored. But in doing so, these girls and women are basically running the risk of transgressing Australia's child abuse publications material. So we see, here's an example from a particular site. And there's also Pokemon slash is quite well known. And Pokemon slash is particularly problematic because there was a ruling in 2009 when a Newcastle man was found with 6 Pokemon characters in sexual scenarios, and he was actually given a suspended sentence for that. So we do know that it is illegal. But my students don't know that it's illegal, and even that I tell my students that it's illegal, they don't really take me very seriously. I mean, it's a Gen Y thing, isn't it? You say you really shouldn't be doing that. What do? They immediately go online and start doing it. So although myself as a teacher, I can control what I bring into the classroom, I can't actually control what my students bring into the classroom. And even though I'm talking to them about the legislation, I can't always get their attention. And given that we quite rightly take child abuse publications legislation very seriously, I really think we need to step up. If we do want to criminalize this stuff, we have to step up and we have to step up, and there's a number of things that we can actually do. So I'll come back to my opening question here. Given the information I've just given you, are we comfortable as a society that we do, in all circumstances, criminalize even the representation of fictional cartoon characters in sexual scenarios? Are we happy with that? And if we are happy with that, I'm suggesting that we really need to do a lot more in terms of community outreach to actually alert young people themselves to the dangers and problems of dealing in this material. Because what's happened here is that legislation which is designed to protect children is potentially criminalizing children, particularly in their online activities. So just to sum up, because I'm going to get an angry look very soon, I want to stress that my research is not looking at the content of this material. I know that it exists because I'm aware of the secondary literature, and I also have colleagues in America and Japan where this material isn't criminalized, who are experts in the actual content. I'm not looking at the content because it's simply too problematic under Australian legislation. One aspect of my project is simply to find out what young people's awareness of the legislation is, and I can tell you it's zero, and to try to alert legislators and other concerned members of the community about what we, as a community, think about this and how we need to address this important issue. So I'll leave it at that point. Thank you.